Thank you, Brian, for the question. Yes, absolutely. This is ongoing. These are groups, individuals that know each other extremely well. These are not gangs in the sense of red and blue, Crips and Bloods. These are groups of young men in the community who easily have access to firearms and exact their revenge on each other. Sometimes it's all senseless. It's just a cycle of violence that has gone on for years, a couple of years with these two groups. And this was clearly targeted. It was not random, once again, and they've done that against each other for a couple of years now. They know each other well, and we say it all the time. They know each other on both sides of the gun. Shooter knows victim. Today's shooter is tomorrow's victim, and vice versa. Today's victim is tomorrow's shooter. And it's unfortunate. It's senseless. And what they committed last night, there is no regard for human safety and human life. Look, sooner or later, there's going to be someone on the porch, a grandmother, grandfather, a young baby in the arms of a mom, and they're not concerned with that. They'll just pull up to the enemy's house and fire a full clip into the house at a enemy of theirs, and fortunately, none of the neighbors' houses were struck on this occasion, but there was a lot of firepower pushed out last night. Steve?
Of the 7 people in the hospital, do you think you've accounted for everyone involved?
We do. But we're not positive, and that's why we're reluctant on releasing names. As far as, on victims, certainly we know, but we're reluctant on releasing names until we tighten up some of the charges, identifications. We have a further opportunity to speak to these individuals on both sides of the gunfire. So yes, that's why we're reluctant.
There's a shooter or shooters still in the community?
No, we're confident that we have them all identified for, and
Any immunity for the people in the house that want to testify against the other group?
say that again?
You make any deal with any of the witnesses?
That comes forward in the furtherance of the prosecution with the Rhode Island Attorney General's office. As you know, we've covered these type stories in the past, and that's oftentimes the case where they do. But you know, we're way early in the game. We haven't even charged anyone yet, but it's possible.
Chief,
We do I'm sorry, John. We do encourage people to cooperate because that's our burden, as you know. John?
Carolina is known as Lakeside. Is the other group, could you confirm they're identified as Southside, these two groups?
I'm reluctant on glorifying these young groups,
Understood.
but yes, you're accurate in their. And the city is so small, and these groups are so transient. Although they may represent a certain neighborhood, they're all over the city now. They have addresses, and if they're from the south side, they have addresses on the west side as well.
But Lakeside, they're the same ones that they have made these rap videos in the past where they like to show real firepower, correct?
Correct. And that's part of our challenge, is that they try to taunt the opposing groups by things they say on social media, and that becomes part of our daunting challenge to combat this type of activity. We know oftentimes, and here's one thing that you'll recognize because you cover us well, but we'll go days, weeks, months without gunfire violence. And in those stretches of time, it is members of the Providence Police Department, along with our partners, our several partners, most importantly on gun violence, the Nonviolence Institute, that are able to keep things tamped down. So we'll see something on social media, and we'll know immediately this is going to evoke a reaction from the other group. And we'll tone that down with our partners in the Nonviolence Institute, with the Providence Police Department. The members of the Violent Crime Task Force, they know all these young men. As an example, in the hospital last night, they're totally uncooperative. They don't give their names. We call in the members of the Violent Crime Task Force and bring them in a room, and they say, that's Tom Verdi, that's Steve Parry. They know every one of them. And And they have a good relationship and a good rapport with them, because in a strange dynamic, they kind of keep them safe too. Because oftentimes when our violent crime task force pull up to a scene, a group will say, hey, just so you know, such and such a group just rolled by here and they flashed a firearm or they fired a few shots. Parker?
Can I ask Mayor Alonso a question, actually?
Sure.
Let me just take Parker first and then,
Chief, there's been a huge uptick in guns
Yes.
seized by the Providence Police. How do you account for that, and where are these guns coming from?
so there has been a huge uptick in firearms seized in Providence. We have good intelligence, we have great intelligence. For some reason, in the year 2020, there was a lot of displacement, there was a lot of unrest. We've seen in cities across the country eerily similar data as it relates to an uptick in shootings, uptick in homicides, and an uptick in the availability of firearms in the community. So a credit to the men and women of the Providence Police Department, and that's, you know, that's a risk to the men and women of the Providence Police Department. Right now, we're up to the upper 60s in young men in the community charged with illegally possessing a gun. That's not a good thing. But that's happening in cities across the country. We speak to our colleagues all the time, regionally, nationally. It's the same data around the country.
Colonel, does the,
Mayor, question?
Let me just jump in. Give me 1 second, John, and just to complete that thought from the chief, you know, our police department, I get a briefing every morning on what happened public safety wise on the previous night, and you know, on a daily or weekly basis, our police department is making incredible arrests and getting guns off of the streets. And it's really amazing. You know, as the chief mentioned, oftentimes putting themselves in danger and putting themselves at risk. And some of the guns that they're getting off the street are terrifying. They're just really scary weapons. Sometimes they're weapons of war. They have no business being in the hands of civilians. And so, you know, I can certainly testify to that and give credit to all the men and women in the police department for the amazing job that they do to get guns off the street on a regular basis. Go ahead, John.
Mayor, you were at a briefing this morning with members of the community, elected officials, Institute of Nonviolence. But some of the things that were said by elected officials, they blamed water quality in the city, they blamed asthma, they blamed the Providence schools. Why won't elected officials see that when police are demonized and kids are encouraged to go out of school and not respect police, that it translates to people not cooperating with police? So my question is, why isn't there more of a concerted effort of elected officials, Senator Mack was there, Batista, to cooperate with police?
So I can't speak to them. I can't speak for them, but I can tell you this, that
You heard their comments this morning.
I did, yeah.
Okay.
It's not an either-or proposition, and so oftentimes, sort of we reduce the arguments to one far extreme versus another far extreme, when the reality is that, you know, on the ground every day, there's a lot of gray area. It's really murky, and it's really complicated. What I will say is two things. First of all, we have a real problem with guns out there on the streets. As the chief mentioned, you know, I'm in touch with mayors throughout the country. He's in touch with chiefs throughout the country. And there's been an uptick in all of these that the chief mentioned. There's also been an uptick in crime scenes that are riddled with bullets. This wasn't the case even 5-10 years ago. I was at the scene yesterday, and almost every officer to a T was just shaking their head and telling me there are too many guns out there. Whereas a decade ago, there might be a shooting, maybe one person has a gun, maybe two people have a gun. Sometimes it'd be a revolver. You know, this is new, where we have incidents where every person involved seems to have a gun, and they're semi-automatic guns so that they can release all these shots in such a tight period of time. We have a real gun problem here in the city. We have a gun problem throughout the United States. The second piece is, you know, we also have to ask ourselves, like, what does it take for someone to lose all hope in their future so that they believe that the best way to address a conflict is to grab a gun and try to kill somebody with it? There is something seriously wrong with kids ending up in that position. So I truly believe that these are systemic issues. You know, here in Providence, we've had our schools that have been failing our kids for decades and for generations. You know, we have an economic system that has also been giving more money and billions to Jeff Bezos, and families on the ground are struggling. A lot of these pressures, they're economic pressures. You know, we have a housing system right now where costs are on the rise, rents are rising, they displace families, they uproot them from their communities. These things take tolls on people's lives. And I think that it goes without saying that we're also living in a society right now where the level of anger that exists in every facet, it's creeped into every corner of our lives. It seeps into everyone. And so, yes, these are larger forces at play. This isn't something that we're just experiencing here in Providence. This is something that we're seeing throughout the entire country. There is a problem and we need to address that. So, you know, we fully acknowledge there are specific issues related to this case that need to be addressed, but there are larger societal issues that need to be addressed as well. And we can do one and the other at the same time.
Alcalde, si se sabía que había tantas armas en esa casa hace 3 años, ¿por qué hasta ahora están haciendo algo?
Hace 4 años, sí hubo ese incidente, la persona fue arrestada y fue condenado y pasó tiempo en la cárcel. Parece que hace poco esa misma persona acaba de salir. Desde ese entonces, yo hablé con todos los vecinos ayer y cada uno de ellos me dijo que en los años que han vivido ahí, nunca, jamás han tenido un problema con esa casa, con esa familia. Este fue el primer incidente como este que ha pasado y desafortunadamente la respuesta ha sido lo que ha sido.
Vimos hoy que eran hispanos, ¿nos puede confirmar que son hispanos?
En este momento no puedo confirmar eso, pero vamos a confirmar todas las víctimas y también los responsables en las próximas horas. No más tardar, me imagino que el lunes.
Can you say that in English too?
Sure. So the gentleman asked, and there was an incident where guns were seized back in 2017. If there was an incident in 2017, why wasn't there a response in the interim by the police department? And I mentioned that in 2017, there were a number of guns that were seized from that home. The person responsible was indeed arrested. He spent time in jail, and from what we believe, he was recently released. I spoke with all of the neighbors who were on the scene yesterday, and all of them told me that that's a quiet street and that they have never had an incident with any of their neighbors and haven't had any incidences with that house either. Unfortunately, this is the first incident that we've seen, and this has been the response.
Any idea of how they obtained those guns?
So yes, and it's consistent with all of the guns we seize, and at some point, the information comes from ATF, and we'll be able to give you a breakdown for the calendar year 2021, but that'll be released from ATF. But it's a compilation of straw purchases, handed down illegally through family members or through the black market. Oftentimes, people trade firearms for drugs, house breaks, stolen firearms. We don't see like they have the problem in the Midwest near Chicago, right outside of Illinois, or down south where you have these trailer truck shows and flea markets where they sell guns. We don't have that problem here. For straw purchases, the black market selling firearms within the street, and house breaks. And we could give you a breakdown from the previous years and this year of the 68 guns we seized this year. What was the breakdown?
Well, in 2017, they were purchased legally by the gentleman who ended up going to prison. In this case, are the guns that were seized yesterday, do you know where they came from, were they purchased legally by anybody in that house?
I know only of one where it came from. The rest we're waiting on. So no, we do not have the answer. But what I will say is, and the case has been adjudicated, so I think it's fair game, and it's to the gentleman's question of the 2017 case. So the Providence Police conducted a very good investigation, gun investigation, and we did a search warrant, charged the individual. So it's later today we'll send that picture as an example for you to see what type of weaponry these kids have, these young men have, and it's the same group. and that was back in 2017. We'll send you a picture of the 10 guns and the ammunition. It's not good, and I think that plays to their story because it's the same house and some of the same names.
What's the age range of the people who were involved last night?
19 to 25, so young adults, males and one female.
Do you happen to know how many shootings or possibly homicides this year are connected with this particular feud?
We do not. And it's always intriguing to us, and we look forward to that data once it goes to the crime lab, and then we get the NIBIN report. Now that we've seized 8 firearms, now that we've picked up 50, 60 casings, what they're connected to, what are the crime scenes. We always find that extremely helpful. And we'll know immediately, especially the members of our intelligence unit, the Violent Crime Task Force, detectives. Once we start learning of the addresses, it'll make sense as to what groups have been feuding and maybe who pulled the trigger. So all of that ballistic evidence is crucial and important.
To Amanda's question though, do you know, are these two groups the main factors in kind of this ongoing cycle of violence, or are there other feuds going on?
No, there are others. We had one probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we oftentimes say it is a very small percentage of young men in the community who cause all of our violence. And we had a case 3 or 4 weeks ago where there was one young man who was really agitating, and he was a lightning rod in the community, and he was arrested and held, and he's still held. And with that other particular dispute, it simmered down. So yeah, it's a very small percentage of these young men who cause our problems and is our biggest challenge in the community. And when we're able to make a criminal case on them and bring them before the courts, it's important they're held accountable. The problem is when they get back out, sometimes, maybe oftentimes, they get back in the game.
Chief, do you fear retaliation this weekend and setting up patrols obviously?
Yeah, so obviously we're loading up with added patrols both on the uniform patrol side and the unmarked plainclothes side in the respective addresses and neighborhoods where we would expect these two groups to maybe be looking for each other. We've already put out today those addresses, and they're all over the place. They're not in one neighborhood. But yeah, we're concerned with that. That's part of our challenge. That's a big part of our concern. And not only with these two groups. I mean, like I said before, I mean, when we have these periods of time where we go 5 days, we've gone a month and a half with not a shooting, maybe more. And the work that goes on behind the scenes to mitigate and keep that level of violence down, it's incredible, and it's good work. And we've been quiet for a couple of weeks before last night, and that came out of nowhere. We know they don't like each other, but who would predict it at that moment, at that time, at that house? And we're routinely driving by there, and the community knows that.
Just to clarify, no arrests, right?
Correct. No one formally arrested or charged at this moment, but we expect very shortly that will change.
They are being watched at the hospital.
Yes, yes, they are being
You
watched.
want to take it into custody when they release.
Correct. As soon as they're ready to be released by the medical personnel, they will come into our custody.
So in that case, the 2 people who've already been released are not going to be charged?
Not necessarily. I mean, the investigation continues. We have a lot of video to look at. We have people to talk to, so everyone is fair game who was part of this incident.